Hey everybody, and welcome to the Black Sheep broadcast. I'm Alex, and today, unfortunately, Trey could not be with me because he's feeling a little bit sick, so he has passed the torch on to me to do this interview with Stephen Bassett, organizer of the Paradigm Research Group, which is a political organization dedicated to achieving government disclosure of extraterrestrial presence. So it should be pretty interesting, and this will mark sort of the end of the season that we have made so far. So thank you for everyone who has been listening. We really appreciate it. And of course, to expedite the process of making another season, please send us any emails regarding your paranormal, strange, or out there stories or experiences. And it's been a real pleasure doing this. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. In a few weeks, we're going to take a little hiatus while we get some guests and start recording some episodes. So thank you all so much, and here we go. To kick things off, we'll just have you introduce yourself and what the Paradigm Research Group is.
I'm Stephen Bassett. Paradigm Research Group is a political activist NGO, which was set up by me in 1996 to pursue the resolution of the extraterrestrial issue by political means. So I'm basically a political activist. Some would say an exopolitical activist. Some would say a disclosure activist.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before. What is exopolitics exactly?
Yeah, exo in the context of referring to out there, meaning ET. And I've been at it now for 23 years, based mostly in Washington. I'm in Washington now, and I'm involved in, I think, what we now refer to as disclosure movement. I'm essentially a political activist who just happens to have an interesting focus, and that is, of course, the extraterrestrial presence. And by that, I mean the presence, not are there ETs or not. There are ETs. Are they here or not? They're here.
Yeah, what does exopolitics actually look like in practice? I mean, are you going to Washington? What are you doing to address the quote unquote extraterrestrial issue?
I launched PRG as the internet revolution is starting to really get underway. So that was helpful because this particular genre, this particular area of activism is brutally difficult.
Yeah, I bet exopolitics is kind of rough because, you're coming under fire from both sides. There's, the government that doesn't want you talking about this stuff, and then other normal people are going to think that you're kind of strange for advocating for this kind of thing.
That's right. The government is denying there is such an issue at all, that there's no extraterrestrial. So my work has been very much internet based, but I've also given the other things I do. One of the key things I do is I've given a huge number of interviews, television and radio interviews, probably somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500. And then I produced 6 conferences. I produced a mock congressional hearing, and then I've lectured at many, many conferences. So there's that. That's the education part. I've done some meetings on the Hill, some lobbying on the Hill, but Capitol Hill has been basically a worthless sump. It's just been awful for the last 20 some years, not just for my issue, but for anything. So and in order to truly lobby, because I am a registered lobbyist on this issue, there's only 2 of us. One who's inactive right now. I was the first to do so. Anybody trying to lobby, very difficult unless you have huge sums of money. And of course, I have no desire to do that and don't have the funds anyway. So it's been an interesting 23 years. It's not like any activist movement ever. It is a movement, but it's essentially in cyberspace. Now there are podcasts and huge number of websites, huge number of Facebook pages, and so forth. So the issue has thrived in the last 23 years and expanded. And one of the key reasons is the power of the internet, which I have used because I don't have the kinds of funds to operate what would be a brick and mortar funded activist operation. But none of my colleagues are really in a different place. I mean, they're in the same place. That's the best way I can answer that question. But a lot of people have an idea of what they think activism is. I mean, they've seen the civil rights movement, women's rights movement, gay rights movement, and so forth. They've seen these and they sort of understand how they go.
Yeah, I mean, you're right that if this movement is successful, it would be a pretty big deal. But I mean, the thing with like civil rights groups is that these groups are concerned with different things that concern them on an everyday basis, um, and restrict their decisions on an everyday basis. How would an alien presence be comparable to that?
Interesting question. Well, the best way to answer that, well, there's two things. First of all, one has to decide if the presence of extraterrestrials engaging the planet is important. It's hard to imagine anybody that doesn't think that, though I'm sure there is. I'm sure the vast majority of people consider it extremely significant. Okay, fine. But why is it therefore a fully engaged matter? Well, that's the answer to that is has been for a long time science. For most of my life, going all the way back to the 1940s, the reason why the extraterrestrial presence issue wasn't engaged in the appropriate way was that there wasn't enough evidence confirming it. In other words, the science didn't indicate it. For most people, that was how they viewed the situation. It's a science problem. Eventually, science will come up with enough evidence, or it won't, and we'll know. But by the time I entered the field in '96, by the time I made the decision to go to Washington to set up and attack this issue or deal with the issue from a political standpoint, I had realized the problem is not science and never was. It's a political problem. The extraterrestrial presence was absolutely confirmed to the U.S. government, though they had some indication something was going on as early as World War II and maybe even a little bit before. But in terms of an absolute conclusive encounter or an event, Roswell locked it in. That was it. So the government, those parts of the government that were allowed to know, were fully aware of an extraterrestrial presence as of 1947.
Yeah, so let's talk about Roswell really quick because I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't know exactly what happened. As far as I know, and correct me on this if I'm wrong, I think it was like the 1930s or 1940s, in Roswell, New Mexico. There was this spacecraft that allegedly fell from the sky and onto this ranch, and a rancher found this felled ship with some charred, like, alien bodies of some sort.
Early July of 1947, there were a couple of crashed events, and they were retrieved by the U.S. government. They retrieved the crash vehicle and all debris, and they retrieved bodies and at least one live ET. So that was a big deal. So at that point, they made the decision that this has to be a national security matter, and they denied it, put out a press release denying it, and thus the truth embargo began.
Now, I thought the US government came out and said that this was actually an attempt to create some sort of like Soviet spy aircraft, something that messed with like the sound waves and would try to like spy on the Soviets. Was that not a thing?
Not initially. They said it was a weather balloon, just a simple raw wind weather balloon. And so the people that have done this research, I mean, it's just not even a close call. Roswell was an extraterrestrial craft, and the government lied about it. For decades after that, the situation was referred to by those that investigated as the UFO cover-up, using the term UFO, which the government essentially developed and encouraged.
Yeah, you're right about that. UFO is definitely a super vague word, and it's also very non-committal because, a UFO can be anything. It's unidentified. It doesn't have to have any connotation of being extraterrestrial in nature.
Right. So if you're studying atomic physics, there's no question what you're studying. You're studying particles at the atomic level, atoms, protons, neutrons, and so forth. But if you're studying UFOs, you're basically studying something that is unidentified, which takes all the juice out of it right there. So that was a good maneuver on the part of the government. But then they took the term UFO and then ridiculed it, undermined it, until they'd corrupted it, bastardized it, so that they could then use it as a key tool of the truth embargo. Meaning that if you're going to get into this genre, I guess you're going to be dealing with UFOs. And the moment you speak that word or write that word, you are immediately tossed into what I refer to as an intellectual ghetto, meaning you're not mainstream, you're not substantive. And it didn't matter whether you have multiple degrees or you're an astronaut or a pilot, doesn't matter. You were simply ghettoized. And this is nasty business. I mean, that's how they maintain the truth embargo, which is what I changed the term. I'm pretty much the one that changed the term from UFO cover-up to truth embargo. I mean, that's part of my work.
Yeah, so you're throwing around the term truth embargo a lot. What is that? Is that just the refusal of the government to acknowledge some sort of alien presence?
They do immediately. They had to. In fact, the press release that was issued by the Army Air Force Base in Roswell, saying that it was a weather balloon, was issued. Well, the press release was issued the same day. So they announced they found a saucer, and then the same day later they announced they hadn't, and then the news articles about the fact that no, it's just a weather balloon came out the next day. So you've got two articles. In fact, they're up on my wall. You've got the front page of the Roswell Daily Record saying that they had found a saucer, and then the second article is on the 9th, the next day of July, saying that Roger Ramey, the general at Dallas, emptied the saucer. So that's the beginning of what I call truth embargo. But they didn't call it that, obviously, but the researchers did. And eventually I said, that's not the correct term. It's not a UFO cover-up. So I injected the idea of the truth embargo. Why? Because UFO cover-up has got two huge problems. One is UFOs, unidentified flying objects. That's a useless, worthless acronym that simply degrades, undermines the people that seriously want to deal with this. And it's not a cover-up. A cover-up implies illegal activity. You don't cover up legal things. You may classify something that's legal. You may not discuss something that's legal, but you don't cover up something that's legal. So that implies that the government was doing something illegal in classifying and holding back information about the ET reality. They weren't. It was fully legal under the National Security Act. And so it was essentially not helpful, because you don't want to demonize or criminalize the people who you're trying to reach with respect to resolving the problem. And the people inside government, particularly in the military intelligence complex, don't think they're criminals. They think they're defenders of the nation. So it was a bad term, but it served the truth embargo, because every time a researcher or an activist would say UFO cover-up, they were just irritating the people inside, who ultimately we want on our side, which is eventually what has happened. So UFO cover-up, it became truth embargo, and the goal of the movement became disclosure, which is, again, a term that I strongly helped develop, which was the prize of the political movement. What is the prize? Is it a Civil Rights Act? Is it a women's right to vote amendment? No, it is the formal acknowledgement of the ET presence. And by formal, it has to come from the head of state. In other words, the president, the prime minister, has to formally inform the nation that ETs are present. That's disclosure. That's the goal. Capital D, it's an event. Small d disclosure is the 70-year process of trying to bring forward information, either on our side or their side, because they put out information as well. Small d disclosure is the process, ultimately leading to capital D disclosure.
I mean, I thought kind of recently, I think it might have been, I forget exactly when it was, but the Pentagon released these videos of these unidentified flying objects or vehicles. And, they didn't say it was alien in nature, but they essentially were just saying, this isn't us.
You're referring to a very complex and elaborate program underway, and there's been a great deal happening regarding that over the last 3 years. Again, that's part of the small d disclosure that's going on, but it's highly significant, and it's what I'm paying closest attention to right now, and what eventually is going to lead, I think, to the breakthrough we've been waiting for early next year.
It's going to be just 1 year until full disclosure, you're saying?
My assessment of what is happening, based upon familiarity with all of the events for the last 23 years, but certainly the last 3 years, October 11th will be the third anniversary of the announcement of the To the Stars Academy, a public service corporation that was made up of fairly high-level people that had formerly worked in high classified programs within parts of the military intelligence complex. The To the Stars Academy as a website, they have been very busy. And almost everything of consequence that has happened since October 11th, 2017 is directly or indirectly related to the activities of the To the Stars Academy. It's a big deal, and I believe that my assessment of what is going on there is that we're looking at major event next year. I think it'll be disclosure, but it'll be preceded by congressional hearings, which we have not been able to get since 1968, though many have tried. But it looks like they're now in the works, and we will have those hearings, and those hearings will, in fairly short order, lead to a situation where the President of the United States will have to confirm.
I mean, the thing about government is that it is, I would argue that it is sort of their job at times to hide the truth from people. I mean, there are some, if your goal is to maintain stability and govern over citizens, I'm sure there are some truths that would just be counterproductive to that goal to let out into the public. You know what I mean?
The success of the embargo for 73 years is quite extraordinary. So this is a big deal. But again, it's because of the embargo, it hasn't been written about or taught about or engaged by a broad spectrum of society. The embargo itself prevented the embargo from being understood. It's going to take a while before historians, much more astute than I, with the resources of college positions and so forth, to write what happened since 1947 on the political end, not just the ET phenomena issue, not the phenomenology, but the political end. It's a significant thing. I'm asked this question all the time. The simplest explanation I can give, the most basic explanation, is not too complicated, in that the timing of the events in Roswell and the explosion of sightings in early 1947, which I believe was not simply random. There was an agenda there on the part of the extraterrestrials, occurred a little under 2 years after we dropped the bombs and dropped in Japan and ended World War II. And by 47, the government was well aware that the Soviet Union had obtained a lot of the knowledge that we had developed to make our atom bomb, in coordination with their own scientists, which had been working on it for a good while, and were well aware that they would soon test their own bombs. As it happened, the first Soviet atom bomb was detonated in 49, and then their first hydrogen bomb, fusion bomb, was detonated in 53. So they knew that was coming. They also knew that the Soviets had gotten a substantial number of German scientists like we had, and that they were working on a missile program. And by the way, the people that were involved in our defense and our politics back in 47 were of a caliber substantially above what we're looking at today. These are serious people. And they had just defeated the Axis powers. And so they, I think, rightly concluded that World War III was going to be a nuclear war and was as likely to happen as not. And so the situation for the human race had finally reached a certain almost denouement. We had been waging war for 10,000 years, if not longer, slaughtering hundreds upon hundreds of millions of people, destroying endless amounts of creation, cities, whole empires wiped away. And now we'd come up with a weapon that could destroy it all. And so this was an existential crisis, unprecedented in human history. And suddenly they get absolute confirmation there's extraterrestrials here. And they concluded that this was not a good time for them to let that get out in the public domain. Not the least of which was that there was technology. They had vehicles. This technology could have huge implications for weaponry if the Soviets had crashed vehicles, or anybody else besides them. As it turns out, I think the Soviets did. And so they're facing a possible nuclear war. They're facing a possible ET technology arms race.
Yeah, see, to me, I don't feel that way. I feel like, you're saying there was all of this tension from, coming at all of these sides during the Cold War. To me, the weird coincidence of the Roswell, or the weird timing of the Roswell incident, it seems to be more like proof that it probably was just some sort of failed military weapon experiment to spy on the Soviets. I mean, to me, that checks out because it totally adds up for this time frame. I don't see how the complexity of, the Cold War would really add to the legitimacy of the claim that this is like an extraterrestrial. I'm sure people would argue that against you.
Well, someone could conclude that, but that someone would be wrong.
Right. Well, I mean, the U.S. You're saying that if this is an alien spacecraft, the U.S. did obtain it and is hiding it, but they didn't seem to find a way to reverse engineer it for the war. I mean, why didn't we have this alien arms race, this alien technology arms race? It seems to have not happened unless we just don't know about it. So I feel like that argument honestly doesn't make a lot of sense, because we're not running around with alien technology now that the rest of the world doesn't have, or at least it really seems like that's not the case.
That's the point. They were facing a lot of known unknown, and they did not know what was going to happen. They knew that the Soviets were going to test and eventually develop nuclear weapons. They knew they were going to develop missiles, so that they knew pretty much what the next war was going to be like. There was an Iron Curtain over Europe by July of 47. And so territories had been staked out, and the Soviet Union was a formidable foe. And we didn't like each other, even though we worked together as allies in World War II and defeated the Germans. The Soviets lost far more than we did, and yet we didn't like them. Because that's just what we do. We have a war, and then we figure out how to set up for the next war. On and on and on.
Yeah, that is totally true. Frankly, that is human nature, creativity and destruction. I think it was Duncan Trussell said that, humans are clever, but we're not necessarily wise.
Absolutely.
We have a lot of knowledge, but the ways that we use it are often just so destructive in nature.
And so they decided, until we know more about who are these ETs? Why are they here? What is this technology? Can we reverse engineer it? We're not going to announce this to the public. We can't. It's going to make it far more difficult to deal with the problem, and not having information is not a good thing. And plus, we need to know what's going to happen with the Soviets. So they made a decision. It's a totally reasonable decision. It was totally legal, and thus began what I call the truth embargo. What they didn't know at the time, might have envisioned, but I don't think so, is that we would not have a third world war, a nuclear third world war. What we would have was a nuclear arms race, which most would say was better than having the nuclear war. But what it meant was, and what eventually happened, is that for the next 44 years after the Roswell event, the world, principally the US and the Soviet Union, but 6 other nations joined in, entered into essentially a nuclear arms race. And we spent trillions of dollars, money that could have fed and clothed and housed and developed nations around the world and helped make this planet a impressive place to be. We spent that money on building nuclear weapons of every kind, nuclear submarines, aircraft carriers, untold trillions of dollars, until we reached a point by mid-1980s when there were somewhere around 85,000 nuclear weapons in the hands of 8 countries. And everyone knew pretty much early on, I think from probably about 1950 on, every living person on the planet that was able to access information, read books, whatever, not everybody could do that, but most, that we were living under a Damocles sword, that at any moment someone could initiate this nuclear exchange, and that would end civilization as we know it, probably for hundreds of years.
Yeah, I mean, this has been the case ever since I was alive. I wasn't alive for that transition, but warfare did change dramatically. The time frame and the urgency just shifted, and now, annihilation is just a button away. The time frame on that is probably, like a few hundred seconds or something to just total annihilation, which has never been the case, throughout history, and that change is just insane.
Well, we still are. We are still under that Damocles sword, except that it's in the context is different. But yeah, we still face nuclear annihilation at any moment. This, of course, is madness, which is why they call that's why the term mutual assured destruction was used. It has the most impressive acronym ever used. MAD. And so they didn't know that was going to happen. And so the problem is that as each year passed after 47, the risk, in a sense, to society got even worse. I mean, look, again, it's better to have risk and be afraid than to actually have a nuclear war and be living on top of a pile of nuclear ash. But still, the risk grew every year. And so the willingness of the military intelligence complex of any nation to confirm, or the military intelligence complex to allow to be confirmed, this extraterrestrial presence was simply not there. They could not come to an agreement to do it, and they didn't. And so by 1991, the truth embargo was in its 44th year and highly successful and entrenched. In other words, it had become ingrained, endemic to global society. It's like peer pressure, right? You just don't think about that, or don't talk about that, don't research that. And if you do, well, you're kind of silly, whatever. It was entrenched. And so now that the Cold War was over by end of 91, and the basis for possibly going forward with the truth on this, it was not going to be easy. It was just not going to happen. Though it could have been done in a couple of years, and I think there were plans to maybe do that. But as it happened, the circumstances subsequent to the end of the Cold War were such that the truth embargo has continued in spite of huge effort to finally end it. But it has prevailed for an additional almost 30 years, which is over half the time of the Cold War. So the truth embargo is now in its 74th year, and that's long enough. I mean, that is long enough. It really has run its course. It really is technically done, and everybody knows it. I say everybody. A lot of people know it, both inside and outside of government. And so, fine. So if it ends next year, that'll be year 74, and I would prefer it to happen a lot sooner, I assure you. But for a change of this magnitude to take place, for an activist movement to achieve a prize of this significance compared to previous other activist movements that we're well of, the big ones, 74 years is not awful, but it irritates the hell out of me that given the knowledge we have and the access we have to information and the internet and everything else, that the truth embargo has continued this long. But I should also mention that one of the other reasons that it managed to get that extra 30 years after 91 is that dysfunction of government started to metastasize. And so essentially, governing institutions have deteriorated dramatically. Authoritarian regimes have still continued and in some way increased. And as a result, we just had rotten government. And so that is part of the reason the truth embargo continues.
Yeah, well, the thing is, if extraterrestrial life is super advanced, I feel like humans probably can't really control it or contain it in a meaningful way. For whatever reasons, if they just have technology beyond our comprehension. I mean, do you think these ETs are super advanced?
Well, if they can fly craft in our skies at 20, 30,000 miles an hour anagravitically, If they can move between star systems, yeah, I'd say they're pretty advanced. Have you had the opportunity to watch any of the Ancient Aliens episodes?
Oh yeah, I love that show. It's weird, and I think it's very reaching. Uh, it's very entertaining, though. I definitely don't buy most of the stuff that they say. Like, as some people thought that like King Arthur's sword was actually essentially a lightsaber given to him from some sort of extraterrestrial presence that was retold as being this lady in the lake, which is like cool, but I don't think I just think that's super reaching.
That show is, I think it's been 190 of them. It's an amazing program. I've been on it a few times. Naturally, it drives the professional archaeologists completely crazy. They can barely watch it. They just climb the walls. I get it. But it's an extraordinary program. It is the product of a brilliant man named Kevin Burns in cooperation with in cooperation and what launched it with Giorgio Tsouplokis and Eric Van Daniken. What that show has done is probably done more to bring the concept of extraterrestrials, the extraterrestrial present, to make it present and real for more people than any other program of any kind, film or television ever. And it's just done that. And the way it did it was to focus on ancient aliens, right? Essentially, though eventually they've gone into the modern era. They've drawn the modern era in, which wasn't always the case initially, but eventually they just had to, and so they drew it in. But it's about ancient aliens, okay? And so what they did is that they said, okay, the people behind that show, like me, have been convinced of the extraterrestrial presence for a very long time. I knew the ETs were here when I was like 19. It was obvious, and I was kind of shocked that why aren't we hearing more about that? Why hasn't the government said something? Of course, I didn't know. I didn't understand the why, but it was clear. It's always been clear. They said, okay, look, we know there's extraterrestrials here. So if there's extraterrestrials here, it's logical to wonder they may have been here before, not just recently, not just since 1947, but going back as far as you want to go. So let's look at as much of our ancient history, which has been gathered by wonderful archaeologists and historians and so forth. Anyway, all this massive knowledge, let's sort through it all and see if we can find any indications that might imply that ETs were here before in ancient times. The idea that we have the only life in this entire galaxy is utter nonsense. And a reasonable person would conclude that. Yeah, we're not the only life here. Okay, fine. So once you go there, it's like, is there any reason why some of that life could not have evolved over billions of years into some sentient species? We have a number of sentient species on our planet. We're not the only one.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely much more life in the universe, probably some intelligent life. I mean, we think that there's microbes on Venus. There's a very small minority of scientists that think that even octopuses might be alien in origin on this planet. So throughout the entire universe, there would have to be some sort of life. And these life forms could have been cooking, they could have been developing for a lot longer than us and, reached some really astonishing technological feats.
Right? You want to include the whole universe, of course. And then you go, okay, fine. Then the next logical question is if we're certain in our own mind that there's sentient, intelligent beings out there, the next logical question have any of them come here? Okay, well, in order to look at that, you have to look around to see if there's any evidence that they have come here. And then the next logical thing you might go is, well, if there's obvious evidence for the ET presence now, is there any evidence for the ET presence in ancient times? And that is where ancient aliens went. And when they started sorting through a huge, huge spectrum of archaeological evidence and also historical evidence, documents, and so forth, in other words, history, they found lots of it. They found indications all over the place, and they pointed them all out. Now, does that mean that every one of the markers that they found within the ancient evidence is in fact extraterrestrial? No. But given how many markers they did find, how many things they have pointed out, the idea that all of that can be explained by some mundane, traditional academic explanation. And so they've pretty much confirmed, as far as I'm concerned. And understand, it's confirmed, but it's hard to reach absolute proof because we're talking stuff from 2, 3, 4,000 years ago and further back. But they have confirmed it to any reasonable person who's not locked in to the mainstream truth embargo and ideology, that, yeah, there were ETs back then as well.
Yeah, I mean, if aliens were present during our more primitive times, they would certainly have left some sort of cultural, religious, spiritual imprint on our society. I think an example that I like a lot is it's the opening scene from Star Trek Into Darkness, where basically, the more advanced, like the main characters, the Spock and Captain Kirk, they're going to basically prevent this catastrophic volcanic explosion that would eradicate life on this planet, this rising culture. And in the process, they reveal their ship, their, alien spaceship. It's sort of like a disc with weird jets. And these primitive aliens see this. And, their rule is like, we're going to go to this planet. We really don't want to be seen because we don't want to drastically change the trajectory of this planet and its life. And what happens is that these aliens see their ship, these primitive aliens see this advanced ship, and then they begin etching it in the dirt. And the implication is just that, once they were discovered, there is this runaway effect where some sort of cultural, religious significance is going to be attached to this otherwise inexplicable thing that these aliens have seen.
Well, let's restate it this way. I am comfortably convinced the society, the civilization that we have now, and the civilizations that have come before us have an extraterrestrial influence that is extremely complicated and it's going to take a long time to sort out. It's not like, oh, there's one thing. No, there's an influence there. It has helped shape our modern society. It helped shape society from going back a long ways. And we don't, and we're not allowed, we're not allowed to teach by and large. We're not allowed to engage, at least in the mainstream world, in the credentialed world, because of the truth embargo, this extraordinary information. And so we're missing a huge truths about who we are, what we were, where we might be going. And that, of course, is, to me, of an abomination. It's almost evil, but it's what power does. It's what governments do. So what we're literally talking about is ultimately coming to perhaps an understanding of all of this. And that's a pretty exciting thing. But what's impressive is how people with tiny fraction of the resources that the government and mainstream academia and research operations have available to them to study anything they want and everything, and advance society, I'm not denying that the people that have tried to engage this issue have had nothing. And with almost nothing, they have learned and sorted out an enormous amount of information that a great deal of which, certainly the majority of which, will ultimately be proven true. These are my heroes. Whether history will acknowledge them remains to be seen. Whether they'll be properly appreciated, don't know. But they are incredible people. I'm happy to be doing what I'm doing. And we are going to learn soon that the ET presence is real, which will launch a worldwide investigation and reinvestigation of everything. And use that to get the hell out of the hole we dug ourselves in, which is where human society and the collective has built up the weaponry to annihilate itself. At the same time, it's destroying literally the environment it lives in, which is mad squared. Mutual assured destruction squared. If we can't blow ourselves up with nuclear weapons, we'll just kill ourselves off by destroying the environment. These two things have been underway simultaneously for my entire lifetime.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a theory about why life doesn't exist. Like the great filter theory, basically that intelligent life is harmful to itself, and maybe it has propped up and been cultivated on other planets, but it's equally likely that they have eradicated themselves for whatever reason. If it's nuclear technology, and maybe by the time aliens swing around Earth, all they find is nuclear waste. They're like, I guess there's no life here.
It could have happened. Obviously, it hasn't happened all that much, or the ETs wouldn't be here.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm not I'm not entirely convinced about like this Roswell thing, but I mean, I will say that throughout history, some scientific progress requires big leaps, and specifically big leaps that people in the past were not willing to take. If you think of things like heliocentrism or like the Earth being round, I mean, there were, for the time, really out there ideas that later turned out to be legitimate. So maybe that's the case with your ET theory.
The nature of humans to resist new information has played a very important role in the pace of development. The advancement of science, the advancement of understanding and knowledge, and also I think the advancement of social well-being. It's part of our DNA. I get it. It would be easy to get angry about that and stay angry about that, but I try to remember that with or without alien extraterrestrial involvement with our biological development, which may very well be true. I say some involvement. We are still beings that we evolved from animals. I say we are an animal, and we have always been an animal, and we know what animals are like. And so as you go back further and further in time, humans become more and more basic, and then fundamentally just like every other animal, doing nothing but to survive. And so our genetics structure is fundamentally around procreation and survival. That's it. That's the way life is. You look at very primitive life, single cells or very basic, crude life forms. I assure you, there's only two things going on there: survival and procreation. Not a part of some basic primitive species involved in maybe trying to develop algebra. No. And so for most of our existence, for the vast 99% of the existence of not but Homo sapiens, and other hominids that were part of our development, that's all it was. That's what our DNA is. And so now you have being an animal whose fundamental DNA structure is about survival and procreation, but has developed civilizations involving a host array of other options and processes and engagements and activities, an almost an infinite number of activities compared to what the earliest humans dealt with or pre-humans dealt with. And so we're trying to work our way through that. We're trying to move forward, but we're still carrying that fundamental DNA matrix. You build some extraordinary city like Dresden, it's like creating a home, creating a place to live, place to survive. It's basic. And then another part of our DNA turns up and burns it to the ground. Destroying things has been part of our survival for a long, long time. You've got to kill stuff and eat it. You've got to destroy animals that threaten you. You've even got to destroy other humans, frankly, that might threaten you. And so survival has led to that kind of behavior. I get it. And it's still there to this day.
Yeah, the human condition definitely is a sort of tortured thing because, we have these cultural notions of civility and laws, and I think it's great that we have them, that we try to elevate ourselves above the natural world. But at the end of the day, that's just not the case. We're running on caveman hardware, unfortunately, and that applies to all sorts of things. I mean, that's why you get behavior like people buying all the toilet paper from Walmarts even when they don't need it, survival instinct. Or even if you think of things like, like monogamy and marriage, is that it is seen as this like sacred sort of almost defining trait of humanity. But the thing is that we are creatures that just desire reproduction so much and diversity, and it's sort of like trying to fit like a square block into a circular hole. There's just a gulf fixed between this civility that we want to achieve and our biological drives.
Absolutely. It's there. And we know that even the most sophisticated humans, if reduced to the right circumstances, that stuff kicks in and the rest of it goes out the window, which of course is the whole premise behind the Lord of the Flies.
Oh yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, Lord of the Flies.
So, but again, it's non-trivial. It's non-trivial. So essentially in the modern world, we've come to the point where these fundamental genetics of survival and procreation have now become counterproductive. They are now antithetical to the purpose of those genes. But what if you procreate to the point where your very numbers are destroying the environment? All animals do this. Most animals procreate to the point where they overpopulate, and then nature balances it out by culling them out. So in that sense, it's not counter to the fundamentals of genetic involvement, evolution, but it's a little more awkward when you apply it to advanced sentient beings. And so we procreated to the point where it's now a major problem, and we're going to have population management soon. And so there's that. And then the destructive capability that in the old days, in the ancient days, was like pick up a stick and kill an animal in order to survive, or kill some other Homo sapien that turned up that doesn't want to, you're afraid might harm you. Just pick up a stick and hit them on the head. Now it's launch nuclear weapons and blow up entire countries. That genetics has now become counterproductive. We are now operating, and have been for some time, in a contest with ourselves. Our very essence is in direct conflict with itself. We are the biggest, it's like they said, we found the great cartoon quote, we have found the enemy and it's us. So it's not the other, it's really us. And this is, if it wasn't for this, if we had been able to evolve out of some of those animal fundamentals sooner, we would have created an entirely different society. And it may be that if there was ET intervention in our genetic development, that intervention was along the lines of trying to get us out of that place, to try to move us away from those fundamental animal. Otherwise, it would have been even worse. The solution here is not only information and knowledge, but it is also technology. The solution to population is birth control technology of the highest degree. The solution to the environment also includes substantial technological shifts and changes.
Right. And I mean, how the future pans out with that is going to be fascinating to see. But I read recently that fertility rates are actually going down. And it's not necessarily because of birth control technology or because of actual infertility. It's just that people have children later in life. They have less children. They're spending more time at work or getting education, and it does flatten population growth. And I really don't think that's a bad thing. That some people are really stuck up about, here's women who would rather have a job than have a family. I say go for it, because we could use some people like that, just pragmatically and objectively. We could use some people that aren't having children, to be honest.
Look, humans are going to continue to kill each other even after the ET presence has been confirmed. We may have wars after that, maybe not. But certainly we're going to have violence. Some violence may be a result of learning this truth. Some people are going to react badly. So what? Truth is not something that a majority of people believe. Truth is truth, whether a majority of people believe it or not. And so when we learn the truth of the ET presence, some people will be upset by it and they will act badly. I don't think it's going to be that many. I don't think it's going to be that much, frankly. A little more concerned about governments acting badly. There may be some governments that are going to handle the post-disclosure world in a somewhat destructive way. Could it trigger a nuclear war? That was the principal concern of the military intelligence complex of America and other countries, which is why we had a truth embargo. But ultimately, the truth embargo was going to end because the evidence is just everywhere. So it had a shelf life. You can stick something in the ground and bury it, make it a secret and bury it, and it may stay a secret for the next 10,000 years. But that's not what we have here. We have a phenomenon that's worldwide, global, and being seen by millions of people. So it's going to end. So when it ends, will a nuclear war be a possibility? Look, thanks to really bad government on the part of many countries, including ours, we're still at risk of a nuclear war. In fact, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has placed the doomsday clock at 100 seconds. That's the closest it's ever been, even during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the reason they did it is because while the Cold War was certainly a existential threat, it was relatively stable because of mutual assured destruction and the nature of the situation during those years. It was relatively defined. Since the end of the Cold War, things have gotten very undefined. It's smeared. It's much less stable in a way, much more difficult to maintain. It's kind of chaotic. And they're anticipating that chaos could be the factor that launches a nuclear event. So we're 100 seconds out. So now I believe the truth embargo is going to end next year. And it's ending at a time when things are a little chaotic. Look at it this way. The way we're going, on the path we're going now, if we don't change course, then we're going to get where we're going, aren't we? And where we're going is a nuclear war. We've been headed there for 70 years. So we're pretty much headed for a nuclear war already. So therefore, one can make the case that any change of direction that can pose a reasonable prospect that it will take you away in another direction, away from that path, you've got to give it a shot.
All right. Well, Steve, before we wrap things up, are there any plugs that you want to give?
A couple of things. First of all, I'm about to launch, finally, a podcast called The Disclosure Wire. It will be a video podcast out of my studio here in Washington, D.C. And people look for that. Obviously, it'll be announced on my website, which is paradigmresearchgroup.org. Just Google those words or paradigmresearchgroup.org, comes right up. My name brings it up, I think, too. And you'll see, you can get to the Disclosure Wire there. Again, it'll launch soon. And also at my website, you can sign up for my updates list. It's free to get information. That updates I've been doing that for quite a while. And I'm hoping to build that list up. It's it's sizable, but I'd like to see it double in size. So that's where you can sign up for that as we move towards what's coming. And what's coming, and I'll finish with this, is what to look forward to. Is I anticipate that shortly after the election, you will suddenly learn, or you will hear that hearings are going to be held regarding this phenomena. The first real hearings since 1968, which is a one-day event. We're talking hearings that will be in multiple committees that will last for weeks, and that those hearings will lead to disclosure. That's what I anticipate, and that's what I look for people to expect. And I will be in my podcast addressing all of that as it unfolds over the next 5 months. So I'm looking forward to getting that started. I'm all set up, ready to go. And I'm looking forward to doing a lot of interviews as well. I'll be doing a lot of that.
Yeah, well, I wish you luck with your podcast, and thank you very much for being on and talking about all sorts of crazy stuff with me, alien life and ancient aliens. It's been a lot of fun.
Stay healthy, my friend. Stay safe. You don't want to miss this. History is sometimes amazing things happen. Sometimes history is beyond hell, and people have to live. People live through both kinds. I think you're about to get lucky and experience the most extraordinary time in the history of the human race.
Yeah, maybe. That'd be awesome to live in a post-disclosure world. I mean, things are already so crazy now, but that would really be icing on the cake, I think. Maybe in a positive way. And if your timeline is correct, and we get the capital D disclosure in a year, well, then I'd love to follow up with you because that would be one of the most insane predictions of all time, and I'm sure you would have a lot to say.
I will. Take care.
Follow us at Broadcast Sheep on Twitter or Black Sheep Broadcast on Instagram.
And you can also follow us at Black Sheep Broadcast on Facebook.
And we have our Black Sheep Broadcast YouTube channel that you should go check out and subscribe to, please.
We're also on SoundCloud. And if you have any stories or experiences that are paranormal, strange, or just plain out there and you want to be on the show, shoot us an email at blacksheepbroadcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you next time on the Black Sheep Broadcast.